Howdy, all you delicious people. I'm here today to review Day of the Dead 1985. Like, I ended up kind of like reviewing this movie, getting it all done, and wanting to just upload it. And I realized, you know what? I just want another bite at this apple. Like, I want to just try and kind of really break down this film just a little bit differently than what I did originally because I feel a little bit more like better to get at this. So going into the Day of the Dead, I think the main appeal of which that I wanted to finally do this is because I've been technically watching the series, the Day of the Dead, the series, and I wanted to eventually just kind of start to comb through some certain Day of the Dead movies to just kind of make some comparisons or to see what they took from, see what they kind of went on and made similar. Which, when I was to go and watch to think of the series and think of this movie, I'm like, completely different things. Like, this is supposed to be from the George Romero adaptional thing, but I think what they really did for the show is I think they took the name and they took like some character names like McDermott is to be one of the characters in this film. Um, but I think kind of after that, there isn't a name that really sticks out to me that really compares from this movie to the actual series. Also, just kind of a drastically different thing compared to the series. Uh, there isn't much of like a day zero for this movie. It just kind of has us come in onto this zombie apocalypse, and we're just to kind of eventually get to understand what these characters are trying to do, what their survival goals are in this movie. Um, Going into have also seen Day of the Dead Bloodline. That movie is very much like this one because I guess that's much more of like a remake or like a legitimate, seemingly taking from the source material and trying to create something fairly interesting. Whereas the series, go ahead and check it out. It's on Sci-Fi right now. It's SYFY. There's two series or two episodes up that series already. So, how did I feel about Day of the Dead? Well, I'm gonna be brutally honest. Like, I feel story wise, there probably are better zombie stories. Like, looking at possibly like a movie that I've seen recently called Return of the Living Dead. I'm like yeah, you kind of have that whole movie that's kind of tied to one or two certain spots, and but eventually they put out so much of an interesting story where like as this film there kind of is like not much real legitimate like interesting story out of here, but eventually there is to be like a different kind of thing of this compared to all the other zombie movies. So I guess I can praise this movie for doing that, like trying to put out something vastly different than just a simple like, oh hey, a zombie infection infects this town, and so now we have to deal with it. Like this goes into a different approach, and I can applaud them for that. We are to supposedly also have Greg Nicotero in this movie. A lot of people probably mostly know Greg Nicotero from The Walking Dead and that him either being a zombie at one point in that show or just somehow being involved in that show somehow. So, uh, so really just going into this movie, I would have to say that this is probably, uh, like, I would have to just say that this is probably just an okay zombie film. And that's about it because, like, I would probably just have to figure out what other kind of grading system that I would have put through any other zombie movie, and I just feel like this has a less than appealing story, but there's something good enough about it to where I would recommend people watching this film. Um, but yeah, like there are at points in time we have a character named John who's to be the helicopter pilot that is to eventually kind of break down like how the world was and now how the world should be, because we have John who is to kind of find this kind of three ring binder kind of thing about kind of keeping tabs on certain kind of records and stuff like that. And John is like, I'm sorry, if we're to ever get out of this whole zombie apocalypse thing, we need to take all these records and keep all this like record keeping kind of thing. We need to abolish all that. Give everyone a clean slate because like they've all had to desperately figure out how to survive this whole thing. Like why do we have to like have a tab of people to eventually have them forcibly, hey, yeah, you survived the zombie apocalypse, but here's a bill. Here's a big fat bill. Or here's just, like, oh, hey, yeah, like, you survived the zombie apocalypse. Well, we're going to go right back to start, like, asking for rent. And eventually, hey, if you're going to go to the grocery store, well, that's going to cost something. Like you can't just go randomly into a grocery store and just steal whatever you want, because we're back to normal world now. So I think that's why a lot of people hang on to these like post-apocalyptic movies, to where like it gives them freedom back, to where instead of having to forcibly just worry and stress about so many like things piling up out of control, all of a sudden instead like I think people would just have a much more stressful moment of having to just boil it all back down to just like having to survive because you're probably going to easily get killed in this zombie apocalypse. So with that said, what is the teeing up part of this movie? Well, uh, we end up having these people who are to be in some kind of military fortress or military base. And so we end up having certain scientists that are going and trying to do some studies with zombies to try and figure out if they can learn anything or if they can eventually uh, try and eventually like remember what certain things were from their past life, and eventually they start to. We eventually start to have people, because of this whole scenario, eventually start to lose their freaking mind. So it eventually becomes also that certain characters are to uh, really start to weigh their power against people. To really, when it all comes down to like, well, who has more guns than somebody or who is to be stronger than someone. And so the story just kind of breaks down with certain people just kind of losing their sanity. And like we have these military force guys that are to be like Rhodes or Steele or Rickle. I think that's his name, Rickle or yeah, I think Rickles. Yeah, goofy name. And Torres and all these characters, and so uh, these guys are starting to eventually start to realize how pointless it is to just kind of stay in this environment, and that eventually it's going to slowly but surely eventually get to the point where they're just going to want to get the heck out of here. They're going to eventually realize that they're going to run out of resources, and they also realize that like people are turning on them, and so eventually it just comes down to like, hey, it's me versus them, and they're going to lose. So with that said, that's all that I want to really just say about this movie. Uh, so solid, okay film. Uh, I'd recommend people watching it just so that way they can eventually, if people are gonna go ahead and watch the series, because it seems like a plenty enough of those people are. So by and large, check out these movies to just kind of just be like, hey, like I can watch something better. Maybe the show will get better, but 2 episodes in, and I'm just like, this is an arduous process to watch. Plus, they're kind of doing too many kind of stories where I don't have interest in a lick of any of them. But we'll kind of see how other episodes break down, and I hope eventually episode 3 really starts to eventually focus on the zombie apocalypse of things. But kind of bottling when exactly this is all breaking down and whatever for me to actually review this, because this might just be a timeless thing that people might enjoy at some point. Be like, yeah, that show sucked. Why is he talking about that? Because it just so happens to be on. So, with that said, let's just go into spoilers about this one. Let's kind of crack it out, because like there might be some details that I would much rather just talk about in spoilers than just kind of teeing any portion of this up. So let's get into spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about that time we get to spoil this movie. So, very beginning of this film, we have a doctor named Sarah who is to immediately have this dream sequence. She's all of a sudden looking at this October calendar. It seems like she has nowhere to go. It seems like the walls are closing in, kind of situation. And so Sarah is to just be staring at this calendar to all of a sudden have all of these zombie hands just be bursting through this wall. And Sarah ends up waking up in this helicopter with McDermott, who is to be on the, I guess his name is to be taken and put into the series, because McDermott is to be some like detective. So they really just took like possibly people's names, maybe, and fused them into the show, but didn't do a good enough job of really making us care about any number of these people. So it's not the same thing. So McDermott, John, and Sarah, and I want to say Miguel, but I'm not quite 100% sure on that. These guys all go out and have this like huge foghorn of a thing to desperately try and see if anybody's out there to have them get to safety. And so we end up having this moment where these people are trying to call out for people, and all the zombies are just like, huh? All the zombies are like, what? And they're like, who? So these people continue to call, like, hey, like, if you guys are alive out there, let us know so that way we can come and help you. And so eventually it seems that this town is completely deserted, and it seems like they could not have found a lick of anybody to bring back. And so they end up coming back to this compound where they have this kind of weird elevator system that gets them into this compound, this headquarters. And so, of course, people are to ask, like, hey, did you find anybody? And it's like, no, we didn't find anybody. We also end up getting an update because I guess one of the soldiers were to have gotten sick and were to have died. So mysteriously, like, we end up finding out that there's something really happening with those soldiers, and there's a reason why every one of them are seemingly starting to die off. So eventually Sarah is to go and with Miguel to go with a soldier named Steele and Rickles. I think it's Rickles. And so they go and they are starting to wrangle up these zombies to give Frankenstein some more test subjects for him to be able to kind of experiment on these zombies, because he is trying to test their memory skill. And it seems like they're trying to say that they're going to come up with a cure, but really not for these zombies. Like, I think really what I really think Frankenstein or Logan in this movie is to eventually just come up with a way to possibly weaponize these zombies, and so that doesn't seem quite right. Because but let's get this out. So Miguel, who is to already be like stressed out to the max, and is to now have to forcibly help these guys, and he's going to be the wink link in this chain. And so Miguel is to have this like stick thing that is to like kind of collar up this one zombie, and he accidentally drops it because of his stress level. And so Sarah has to go and grab this stick and just kind of hold on to this zombie. And so Steele is to grab Miguel and be frustrated that one of his men was to almost die because of Miguel's just klutziness. And so Steele is holding Miguel almost over this zombie for this zombie to start grabbing at Miguel's kind of little dog tags or whatever. So Sarah is to desperately plead for Miguel's life, and so Miguel ends up kind of eventually needing to go off with Sarah to get a sedative so that way he can sleep. And we have Miguel who kind of just slaps Sarah and is like, "Why did you do that?" Because he's kind of like refusing, like getting a sedative from her, even though obviously he needs one. So Sarah is to go off to talk to Rhodes, and so Rhodes is to tell like Sarah, "Hey, we're all getting together, and we're all gonna have a meeting. Like we're all gonna have an update about what's all like what everybody needs and what's all going on, so that way we're all on the same page." Blah 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 blah. So Sarah's to mention it's like, well, hey, you're gonna be one short because Miguel took a sedative, and so he's going to be sleeping during that whole time. And Rhodes is just like, "I'm sorry, but like, do you realize how like small of numbers that we dwindled down here, and you just decided to just make this group even smaller by having this guy sleep?" And so, uh, like Sarah is like, "Well, I'm sorry, but Miguel needed this," and so Rhodes is like, "Well, here's the thing, like anything that you're gonna have to do has to be approved by me now. Like if you like sneeze, I want to know about it, basically." So eventually Sarah is to go on and is to talk to Fisher, and Fisher is just kind of like, "Hey, like watch yourself, girl. Like freaking like at any point in time, like any one of us could be expendable." Considering Rhodes is just kind of eventually going to be at a warpath probably sometime soon. And so Sarah's like, "Well, thanks Fisher for the heads up, but like I think we'll be fine." So eventually we have kind of Frankenstein. They end up consistently calling him Frankenstein in this movie, but his name is Logan. We end up having this doctor who is to experiment on these zombies, and so we have this test subject who's named Bud, who's kind of in the middle here. Bud is to be given these items, and it's a razor and a book. And at some point, they also hand him a gun to see what he does with that, also. And so Bud is to take this razor and to just kind of seem like he's going to shave, but he ends up just cutting himself. And then he ends up going and seeing this book, and he ends up like opening it up, and like it looks like he's going to read it. And so Dr. Frankenstein is like, "Oh my god, like so these zombies do like remember bits and pieces of their previous life." So like there is some kind of brain churning in there, and that's so fascinating. So eventually both Fisher and Sarah are to realize that weirdly this doctor is to have these kind of meat snacks to give to these zombies. And so both Sarah and Fisher are like, "Where are these meat snacks coming from? This doesn't make any sense. Like, I don't know where he would be getting this food from. Like, unless he's chopping up other zombies to feed to other zombies. Like, where is he getting this food from?" And we end up finding out that several of the soldiers that would consistently end up dead for one reason or another would simply be because of Frankenstein is going and taking this fresh uh, meat and giving it to the zombies. So eventually, later on, Rose is to go off and kill Frankenstein or Logan because of him doing that. Because like it's basically this guy just eventually just be like, dude, I can't trust you anymore. So you're gonna get some bullets to the chest. Goodbye. And that's eventually when chaos just ensues. So eventually, Sarah is to go off and meet with McDermott and John. And so both of these characters kind of say it's like, well, hey, like we technically are to be the possibly most securest guys out of this whole group of people because John is to be the only one who can fly that helicopter, which I always thought that that was a goofy thing in the film. Why not have multiple people who all know how to use the helicopter for whatever reasons? And so but yeah, so McDermott and John are just like, hey, nobody's gonna touch me. No one's gonna lay a finger on me because freaking like we're the most useful characters here. So Sarah goes off and is to go and be with John and McDermott to just kind of like, you know what, like I just want to get drunk, like I just want to forget everything and just get drunk. And so that's when John is to tell Sarah about all these records that they had kept, like all these like things that they were like uh, trying to eventually, if things go back to normal, like here's all like the setup of how they can approach this. And John doesn't like that at all. He's like, dude, we need to burn all these records, and eventually just kind of let everybody be free. And so. John at some point is like, because eventually they're thinking about like getting the heck out of here, and John is like, man, I just want to go to some tropical island and like get the heck out of here. And so Sarah's like, yeah, you would do something like that, and John ends up saying, it's like, dude, I would be doing something like that even if this wasn't happening. Like, I would just want to get onto a tropical island somewhere and live my best life kind of thing. So because eventually they're trying to like come up with a spot that has like uh this kind of like white picket fence like factor where it's kind of like it's seemingly them coming back to some kind of normalcy. uh but yeah, like so like it's just to give that illusion of some kind of normal. So Sarah is to eventually go off to this meeting, and so people are coming in late, and Rhodes is to mention that to people. It's like, hey, you guys, like I told you what time this meeting was, and everybody's like, yeah, whatever. So all of a sudden, Frankenstein is to pitch in and say like, well, hey, like I'm starting to run low on certain resources, and immediately Rhodes is just like, God, like everyone is saying that. Everybody is saying that they're low on resources. Like I turn to everybody, and everyone is to tell me the same story, is telling me the same thing. So like like if anything, like we need to figure out how to just like replenish like the ranks, and we gotta find food, and some we gotta find like or we're just gonna eventually need to just peel out of here because like we gotta really just keep this up. So so eventually what ends up happening is Rhodes is to eventually go and seemingly find out what Frankenstein is doing, because Sarah and Fisher are to figure this out. And so now Rhodes is to go off and shoot up Frankenstein, and now all heck is breaking loose. And so Rhodes is to go and put a gun to Fisher and to have John kind of relinquish his weapons because he has like a machete and a gun in hand. And so Rhodes is like, well, yeah, you should probably drop those weapons because we're eventually going to chuck Sarah and McDermott and feed them to the zombies that are in this little cave opening where they've kind of been pulling these zombies from. And so John ends up going off and is to eventually kind of fight off some of these military forces like guys. And so we end up having Miguel, uh, who is to have eventually been. Oh my God! There's probably a moment here where I'm forgetting, and I'm going to get to that now. There was a part where Miguel was, I think, to do another like second round of going and getting zombies, and so eventually he just couldn't handle it again, and so eventually he ends up getting bitten, and so Sarah decides that she's going to go and chop off his arm, and Rhodes is to just be like, well, like I don't think I did that perfectly with Miguel. I think there's something happens there where Miguel ends up getting his hand bitten for whatever reason. Um, and so Sarah chops it off, and Rhodes is just like, "Well, hey, he's gonna turn." And so Sarah's like, "No, I chopped off his arm and burnt it, and so like he should be fine. He's just gonna be sitting in this bed and to fight off this infection, and like he should be fine." So Miguel went off and slept, and so eventually he ends up waking up to eventually go off to this elevator that takes them into this compound, and he tries to lure all the zombies into the compound, and then he ends up dying, getting chewed up by these zombies. But he is to basically take all these zombies and put them into this elevator, and then push this button to have all the zombies come down. Miguel also tears apart some of the 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 bits and pieces from the elevator from a certain section of it. So Miguel has the only controlled part that he can adjust this elevator from. Because what ends up happening is Sarah and McDermott ends up just kind of going off to defend for themselves. Uh, Eventually, uh, Rhodes is to eventually kind of wake up from getting clocked by John to eventually run off with a bunch of the military force that he's with. And he ends up going and getting a go-kart for himself and ends up just running off. While because what ends up happening is all the other soldiers go off and try to fix this elevator to get the heck out of here, and all the zombies start coming down, and so Rhodes ends up waking up and is to come where all these other guys are to eventually then run off and jump into this go-kart. And now like the other soldiers are like, what the fuck, Rhodes, like what the heck. Uh so eventually the breakdown of all the soldiers dying. So Rickles is to eventually kind of run off and is to eventually kind of crazily have all these kind of guns on him. He has a like machine gun and he has a handgun, and so eventually he runs off to eventually just get himself just kind of torn and ripped apart by zombies. Torres is to eventually also like try to make his stand against these zombies to eventually have them go and rip his like head off like by poking this zombie's fingers through this guy's eye and just ripping his head away from his body, and so you can just kind of see the neck pieces just kind of being ripped, and so you can just start seeing this body just kind of being pulled apart like a turkey, and sadly enough, and then this body is to be consumed. So what happens to Steel? Well, Steel is to eventually like start going through the parts of this location, like going through hallways and whatever, and he bumps into Bub, which is of course the zombie who's to eventually have a gun in his hand. Uh, so Steele ends up going through to find this door, and he ends up going into the other side of this door. And he thinks he's like, oh man, I'm gonna get the jump on Bub, and I'm gonna shoot him, and he's gonna be dead. All of a sudden, Steele is to realize that all of a sudden there's to be another door where all these zombies are starting to come in, and so Steele is to start to feel very overwhelmed. That eventually he just decides that he's like, well, okay, I'm just going to take my own life. I'm going to put a bullet into my, or I'm going to put a gun into my mouth and pull the trigger and kill myself off that way. So, so that way he doesn't get torn up by all these zombies like all the other people had. So, Rhodes, what happens to him? Well, uh, Rhodes ends up going through and just kind of running around through these hallways. It seems like he ends up kind of stumbling upon some zombies as well. So he continues to avoid them and try to like make his way through more of these hallways to eventually find Bub there with a gun. And so Bub ends up shooting Rhodes and ends up kind of taking him down. But then Rhodes gets back up and tries to kind of waddle his way through further and further on to get away from Bub, just to get shot again. And then that shot is to basically just take him out, and then eventually he ends up getting killed. So, John eventually is to run off and try to find Sarah and McDermott to try to get the heck out of here. And to also have two guns on him where he can try to help these characters a lot more than just them having a thing of a 2x4 and a shovel for defending themselves. Because we have these characters who eventually have these like mining helmets, but they can't really see much. And so eventually they continue to just kind of like thrust on through this cave to eventually have John join with them to have at one spot we had this kind of like shovel thing where McDermott is to kind of shovel this one zombie and to kind of like take a good chunk of this guy's head off. And then when McDermott and Sarah are to run off, we end up seeing the zombie's head kind of flipped upside down, and he's kind of moving his eyes back and forth, and it's kind of an interesting image there. So John rejoins with the group to just kind of shoot up some zombies, and so this whole group eventually gets further and further on, eventually spotting some red lights to tell them that they're eventually going to make it to safety. So eventually they end up finding this elevator shaft that is supposedly broken, and so they see that there's a ladder that is next to it, and so they're like, well, heck yeah, we're gonna go and we're gonna take this ladder and we're gonna climb up this ladder. Also, if I didn't mention what happened to Fisher, so uh, Rhodes had a gun on Fisher, and so basically Rhodes immediately shot Fisher in the head and killed him off. If I didn't explain that, because like Rhodes is just like, dude, I'm gonna kill all of these people, and basically the only person that I find is really important out of this whole group is actually just John, because he's the only person that can really get us out of here. So so now all three of these characters are all climbing up this ladder to, I guess, eventually make it to this helicopter. And so what ends up happening is that Sarah's to weirdly have another one of these dream sequences where she thinks that she is going to die or get taken by a zombie, to all of a sudden wake up onto this tropical island where she is to be like kind of metaphorically like sipping mojitos with John and McDermott and like, hey, we made it, and like, yeah, we did. And so really that's just how this movie eventually just kind of fizzles off and ends. So with that said, I think I covered most of this. Like, I think there was some certain dialogue that I didn't really want to get to, or there was some stuff where I kind of felt was kind of repetitive or whichever. Um, but yeah, so I think that's all I wanted to say about this review of Day of the Dead, 1985. So yeah, interesting movie. Okay enough. Like there was some interesting like visual stuff that they did here. We also had the moment where we had kind of Rhodes who's kind of running in this hallway, and all of a sudden there's to be these hands of zombie hands that just all surround the whole screen and kind of made for an interesting visual. But eventually Rhodes is to just kind of run off. Um, so yeah, like I think I covered everything, but then again, something might have slipped through the cracks. There might be some dialogue that I didn't really care about in this movie. Really, some people might have found some dialogue more important than others, or whichever. Let me know in the comments below how you felt about this film, especially if you stuck throughout this whole thing. Some people might have their own opinions about certain kind of zombie movies, and that's completely okay. Because at the end of the day, I am going to get out of here. Bye, buddy. Bye, everybody.